Hey everybody, Even Steven here. Today I'm going to give you some of my teaching tips for Ticket to Ride. First thing I do when teaching Ticket to Ride is tell the players that the goal is to get the most points and that you get points in 3 different ways. One, by placing trains on the board, which based on the number of trains you place corresponds to the number of points you will get. Second, if you complete tickets, which are cards in which you're trying to get from one city to the other, and you get the points on the bottom right. And also remind players if they don't complete tickets that they will get negative that many points. And thirdly, if they have a long continuous route, they might get longest train for bonus points at the end of the game, or Globetrotter, which is if you complete the most tickets at the end of the game, you might get an extra bonus. The next tip I have for new players is with the ticket cards that you will use to place on the routes on the board. When taking cards, remind players that taking a wild might not be the most efficient, especially early on in the game because you only get one card. Whereas if you take two different colors that aren't wilds, you will get 2 cards instead of just 1 wild. Also, remind players that when they are taking different colors, that might cue other players as to where they are going on the map. Speaking of the board, another tip for new players is to remind them that there are certain choke points on the board that veterans know exist already if they've played the game multiple times. So remind them that Nashville to Atlanta is only 1 train of any color, so many players will play that at the beginning of the game. While as from Kansas City to St. Louis, it is easier to wait a little bit longer to play that route because 2 different players can play it on the double route. The next tip has to do with the ticket cards, in which you need to remind players that taking tickets that are closer together will be easier to complete. But for instance, from Seattle to Las Vegas to Washington to Atlanta, these tickets will be very hard to complete because one is on the East Coast versus one on the West Coast. So remind players that maybe taking, in this instance, Boston to Miami and Washington to Atlanta might be easier to complete and save your trains because they are on a similar route. One of the options on a player's turn is to take tickets, and it's important to remind new players that maybe if it's your first time you want to complete all the tickets you got at the beginning of the game as to not overwhelm yourself with new tickets and trying to complete a bunch of routes at once. The last tip I have for new players is for the end of the game, remember that it's when a player has 2 or less trains. So make sure to remind new players to keep an eye on everyone at the table so that they know when the game might end. Okay guys, those are my teaching tips for Ticket to Ride. Hopefully that will help new players jump in and maybe even teach some of those vets some new tricks. We'll see you next time.